Let's start with some phrasal verbs we use in our daily activities and routines. Let's start with the first phrasal verb, put on, which means to wear something like clothes, glasses, or makeup. For example, she put on her coat before going out into the snow. Another example, it takes her a long time to put on her makeup. Next phrasal verb, take off. Take off means to remove something you are wearing, like clothes, glasses, or shoes. For example, it's hot, so she takes off her sweater. Another example, please take off your glasses for the photo. Next one is try on, which means to put on clothes temporarily, usually in a store, to see if they fit or look good. For example, he tried on 5 different hats but liked none. One more example. She tried on the ring to make sure it wasn't too big. Next one is dress up, which means to wear special, formal, or fancy clothes. For example, we love to dress up for Halloween. Let's see another example. She dressed up her cat in a little sweater. Next one is wash up, which means to wash or clean yourself or other things using water. A good example is, he went to the bathroom to wash up his face. Let's see another example. She spent an hour washing up the greasy pans. The next phrasal verb is throw away, which means to get rid of something by putting it in the trash or discarding it. For example, we should throw away the food in the fridge if it smells bad. Another example is, she told me to throw those broken toys away. Now, let's look at put away, which means to return something to its correct place. For example, I need to put away the clean clothes in my closet. Another example, he puts away his car in the garage every night. In both examples, they are returning something to its proper place. Moving on to look for, which means to try to find something you lost or need. For example, I am looking for my car keys. Another example is, can you help me look for my cat? He is hiding. The next phrasal verb is find out, which means to discover or learn information that you did not know before. For example, check the app to find out if it will rain. Another example, I read the book to find out the ending. The next phrasal verb is run out of, which means to use all of something so that none is left. For example, we run out of milk every week. Next example, my phone is going to run out of battery. The next phrasal verb is wash off, which means to remove a substance like soap, dirt, or paint from something using water. For example, the kids need to wash off the mud after playing outside. Another example, she washes off her makeup every night. The next phrasal verb is dry off, which means to remove water from your body or something by drying it. For example, she dries off her hair with a towel. Another example, use the hand dryer in the bathroom to dry off your hands. Next, let's look at the phrasal verbs used during travel and transportation. Let's see the first phrasal verb in this category, get on, which means to enter or board a vehicle, such as a bus, train, or plane. For example, he gets on the bus at 8 a.m. Here's another example. We get on the big boat to cross the river. The next phrasal verb is get off, which means to leave or exit a vehicle, such as a bus, train, or plane. A simple example is, he gets off the bus near the park. Another example is, we get off the plane after it lands. The next phrasal verb is pick up, which means to go somewhere to collect someone or something. Here's an example. I pick up my daughter from school at 3 p.m. Another example, he picked up the trash from the ground and put it in the dustbin. In the first example, pick up means collecting a person, and in the second example, it means picking up a thing. The next phrasal verb is drop off, which means to take someone or something to a place and leave them there. For example, I drop off my husband at his office every day. Another example, the delivery man drops off the food at my door. The next phrasal verb is check in, which means to arrive and register at a hotel, airport, or event. Here's an example. You must check in 2 hours before your flight. Another example, the tourists check in at the resort. The next phrasal verb is check out, which means to leave a place where you were staying or registered. For example, we pay the bill and check out of the hotel. Another example, he checks out of the hospital on Monday. The next phrasal verb is take off, which means to leave the ground and begin flying, used for airplanes. Here's an example. The plane will take off in 10 minutes. Another example, look, the rocket is about to take off. The next phrasal verb is break down, which means when a vehicle, machine, or system stops working. For example, the truck broke down in the middle of the road. Next example, the washing machine broke down yesterday. The next phrasal verb is run over, which means to hit someone or something with a vehicle. Here's an example. The driver lost control and ran over the tree. One more example. The car ran over a small animal on the road. The next phrasal verb is pull over, which means to move your car to the side of the road and stop. For example, the ambulance is coming, so all cars must pull over. Another example, the driver had to pull over to answer a phone call. The next phrasal verb is stop over, which means to stay at a place for a short time during a long journey. For example, the travelers stopped over in Paris before continuing their journey. Another example, we stopped over at a hotel near the airport. Next, let's look at the phrasal verbs used in social life and relationships. The next phrasal verb is get along, which means to have a friendly and positive relationship with someone. Here's an example. He gets along very well with his neighbors. Another example, my cat and dog actually get along quite nicely. The next phrasal verb is fall out, which means to have a bad argument with someone and stop being friendly. For example, they fell out over a silly game. One more example. She fell out with her sister because of a lie. The next phrasal verb is hang out, which means to spend time relaxing or having fun with someone. For example, they spent the whole night hanging out at the mall. One more example. My brother likes to hang out with his friends at the beach. The next phrasal verb is set up, which means to prepare or arrange something so it is ready to use. Here's an example. They set up the tables and chairs for the party. Another example. The band is setting up their instruments for the concert. The next phrasal verb is break up, which means to end a romantic relationship or a marriage. For example, they decided to break up after 3 years. Another example, I heard that the famous couple finally broke up. The final phrasal verb is make up, which means to become friendly again after an argument. For example, after the argument, he bought her flowers to make up. Another example, my best friend and I made up after a big fight.